Hey all, here OS Reviews. Today we're taking a closer look at the Dragon Touch Max10 Plus budget Android tablet that sells for around $150. Now if this feels like deja vu, that's because we did take a look at the Dragon Touch Max10 tablet about a year ago. So the Plus version of this is the newly upgraded model, the difference being that it now uses a QLED or quantum LED display instead of the more traditional IPS LCD from before. So QLED, although it's not exactly the same as OLED or AMOLED, it does have a very punchy and saturated looking image, so it shows off more vibrant and brighter images as well, so it's going to give you a better picture quality when watching videos and looking at images. We'll be doing a quick comparison later in this video. Otherwise, the tablet now has an extra gigabyte of RAM versus the previous model had 2 gigs. This one here now has 3 gigs of built-in RAM. It comes with 32 gigs of built-in storage, further expandable via a microSD card. It runs on Android 10.0, pretty stock, as well as has 2.4G and 5G for Wi-Fi reception, and has a 5000 mAh capacity battery, which is still the same as on the previous generation model. Alright, so inside of the packaging here we have, of course, the contents, and accessories include a USB Type-C charging cable, wall adapter, and a user guide, and of course the tablet itself, which almost immediately once turning it on you can just see how punchy and beautiful the display is. Design-wise though, it is very similar to the previous gen Max 10 since it's part of the same family. We have the front-facing camera on the top, bezel sizes are exactly the same as before, which is to say acceptable for a tablet of this price range. It's slim enough that it still feels quite immersive when you're watching back videos, while still being good enough to grip and hold without touching parts of the display. As for I/O, on the bottom here, we've got the stereo speakers as well as a microphone. Pretty slim build. The body here is made predominantly out of a aluminum alloy, so it feels quite good for this price. And on the very top here, we do have the aforementioned Type-C port for charging, though it takes around 3 hours to fully charge. Now underneath this plastic flap is where you'll find access to the microSD card for expanding the memory. There's also a rear-facing 5 megapixel camera here for taking images, along with an LED flash, exactly the same design again as the previous generation Max 10, so it does have 2 plastic antenna bands on the top and on the bottom, but everything else, as aforementioned, is made out of this slick aluminum alloy, which is cold to the touch and overall feels quite premium. Last but not least, on the right-hand spine, there's access to a volume rocker, a power key, and a standard 3.5mm headphone jack. Now, if we do a quick size comparison here with the aforementioned previous generation Max 10, the standard edition, you can see that, again, they are pretty much identical in terms of body, although one difference that you can delineate with the older model, they had some markings for the different ports, which have been removed on the new model, so it looks a bit more sleek from the back. As far as the displays are concerned, here they are next to each other. Again, the blue one here on the right is the quantum LED display versus the more traditional LCD here on the left, which is the older model. We can see how the new tablet's display definitely has a bit more of a true white to it, as you can see here, versus almost a bluish hue on the older LCD screen. It's a bit colder in temperature, despite the fact that both of these are in the original states taken out of the box. There's no additional calibration done on top of the screens. So in contrast, this one here definitely looks a bit more accurate, while at the same time seeming a little bit brighter as well, since both of these are now both at maximum brightness, so no difference there. The colors like blues and reds just jump out a little bit more versus being slightly more muted on the regular display. Again, the original Max 10 screen was not shabby to begin with, but side by side you can tell how the new model does have more accurate whites and also more contrasty and popping blues and reds, as well as higher brightness by a touch. In terms of the overall fluidity of the tablet, it's also doing a pretty good job in terms of just swiping along and interacting with the main UI. Doesn't seem to really slow down or anything like that, although it is a relatively entry-level Octa-Core chip, as well as a standard 60Hz refresh rate for the screen. There's a plethora of built-in wallpapers that you can customize it with, which are all new, and all of these really just take advantage of the super vibrant nature of this panel and how the colors just really seem to jump out at you when looking at it. Other attributes though, such as the system performance, since it is using technically the same processor as before, as well as the same body, the reception still remains quite good, and there's not a huge difference. If you have the older model coming to this one, it won't feel significantly faster or anything really different, but as far as budget tablets in general are concerned, it is doing a pretty good job. There's a handful of Google apps built on in, including Assistant, Gmail, YouTube are all found. Now, if anything, I will say that just like before, this screen is not fully laminated. it. So there is a slight gap between the 2.5D curved glass that they're using on the top and the screen underneath. It's pretty small, and it's the same story actually on the budget iPad that is still being sold today, but on some more expensive tablets, there will be even less of a gap, and that can reduce glare in certain conditions. But as a whole, again, the brightness of the screen, good enough even if you are reading it and there's a bit of sunlight, no real complaints. Pretty stock and vanilla in the sense that there's not too much going on here in terms of bloatware, and out of the box you get around 22 gigs of storage for you to download your own games and applications with. The rest has been occupied by the operating system. To start off with some of the features here, including the camera, I would say this is actually one of its weakest links since it hasn't really changed from the previous generation tablet. Although cameras on tablets in general are never going to be the main selling points, I think it's acceptable as far as having an okay amount of sharpness for scanning and documents, and that's pretty much it. It's not going to be really a rival to some smartphone cameras that we have these days. We're spoiled by much better lens and processing, but as far as just snapping something quick, it does an okay job. If you're using it for things like Hangouts, for video conferencing, it will still get you by and doesn't pose too big of a problem as long as you're holding it still, setting it onto a table, or having sufficient lighting around you. Alright, so let's take a quick look at the speaker quality by jumping into YouTube next. Overall quality is quite good in terms of the viewing experience, again thanks to this beautiful display that they've picked, along with a pretty good quality speaker. It's similar to the previous gen, so it is a stereo pair on the bottom, so that it does give you a bit of extra added separation when you're watching a video, as well as a bit more volume. It's not going to be quite as loud as some other speakers I've seen, but at the same time I think it still passes and does a good job for watching back YouTube videos, which are shorter, even some Netflix videos. I think it still will handle itself well. The added benefit here is you always have a standard headphone jack, or you can use stereo Bluetooth to connect to wireless headphones or speakers that can further improve the quality. Again, reception quality using Wi-Fi is also very good, above average I'd say, consistently getting me around full bars even though I'm a little bit further away from the router at the moment, so I've always able to pretty much load back videos at a fast speed and also buffer between parts of the video pretty quickly as well. Now, one thing I will say though is just like the original Max 10 tablet, for some reason Dragon Touch has disabled gesture navigation on this device. Now, it made sense I think on the previous gen model just because of the limited hardware, so they probably wanted to reduce animations like gestures to make it feel a bit more fast and responsive, but as it stands, the only way to navigate the tablet is using these physical keys at the bottom, although you can also switch the orientation using the settings, but you can't change them to the full screen gesture mode, despite the fact that it is running on a pretty up-to-date version of Android 10.0, which should support it. It's just been locked by the manufacturer. So that is one thing to keep in mind. Other things though, like picture-in-picture mode and multitasking, are of course fully functional and still work quite well. So overall, a very nice video watching experience for YouTube, allowing us to still jump back and forth between these apps and still keep them open in the background, which is great. Let's try taking a quick look at the web browsing experience just by jumping into Chrome next. Here is The Verge, which is a very complex page, a good benchmark since there's lots of ads, video elements, and small text, which typically struggles on lower end hardware. On this tablet, you can see here that the processor still needs to take a few seconds longer for everything to completely render on the page, but with a bit of patience, everything still will load, and scrolling for the most part still feels quite smooth. Again, pinch to zoom works pretty smoothly. Jump into something like Amazon and see how it does there. Also doing very well despite being the desktop version of the site, and still loading along without too much issues. I can jump back into the first tab and everything is still preserved in the memory. Now, under more intensive tasks, and if you're using a tablet for let's say an hour or two, it does get slightly warm but never gets too hot or really thermal throttles, I'd say. It doesn't have an issue like that, although I did find the heat accumulation to be a little closer to the left-hand edge of the tablet in this area versus the other side being a bit more cool. So this is probably where the section that the CPU/battery are located, but still is comfortable enough for using, and again, doesn't thermal throttle. Of course, it also does a good job when it comes to reading back, let's say, PDFs or textbooks. Other notes and documents also open up very quickly, whether it's Word, Excel or again a PDF like this one. AI comfort mode can also kind of deactivate the blue light on the display, make it slightly nicer if I'm reading things in bed. And there's also the standard things like a dark mode as well that will change everything to a dark background, and you can play around with those settings as well. As a whole, again, making it great for productivity as well, for reading back documents as well as ebooks and also comics, handle itself without any problems on this device. Last but not least really would be the gaming experience, I'd say, on this tablet. Again, the Octa-Core chipset, it's still relatively entry level, so I wouldn't really use this for the most demanding of games, like PUBG for instance. You can definitely download and play it. For example, here is Asphalt 9, which is a pretty graphically demanding game on the same tier as PUBG really, and you can see here that it is playing along okay, but there are some occasional drop frames that you observe very closely, but everything is still playable for the most part. Just will take a little bit longer for the games to open up, especially for mid-tier games and lighter games, puzzle-based games, everything like that will still play along just fine on this device. It will easily last for a few days, typically 2 or 3, depending on how much you're using it, of course, before you need to recharge it again. So as a whole, definitely not shabby, and still being very pleasant when it comes to lighter games and tasks. So that's more or less it as far as our hands-on review of the upgraded version of the Dragon Touch Max10, the Max10 Plus. Really, it presents a much more contrasty and a very vibrant and beautiful display for the price. So if you're looking for something simple that doesn't break the bank, but will, again, perform pretty well for basic usage, I think this is going to fit the bill. You can check out more details if interested in the links down below, but for now that's been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. It's been the Dragon Touch Max10 Plus.